Hello class, welcome to Connected. In today's class, we will be reading the chapter titled Forest Society and Colonization. The chapter talks about the growth of the industries and urban centers, ships and railways, new demand on the forests for timber and other forest products. Students will also get to learn topics such as new rules of forest use, new ways of organizing the forests, colonial control, how forest areas were mapped, trees were classified, and plantations were developed. The chapter will give you an idea of the history of such developments in India and Indonesia. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to learn more about how agitated people were during the French Revolution. You will be able to comprehend the concepts of history more efficiently. Now, students, read out the chapter loudly with me. I shall assist you if you get stuck anywhere. Let's begin reading the chapter. Take a quick look around your school and home and identify all the things that come from forests. The paper in the book you are reading, desks and tables, doors and windows, the dyes that color your clothes, spices in your food, the cellophane wrapper of your toffee, tendu leaves in biddies, gum, honey, coffee, tea and rubber. Do not miss out in the oil in the chocolates, which comes from sal seeds, the tannin used to convert skins and hides into leather, or the herbs and roots used for medicinal purposes. Forests also provide bamboo, wood for fuel, grass, charcoal, packaging, fruits, flowers, animals, birds, and many other things. In the Amazon forests or in the Western Ghats, it is possible to find as many as 500 different plant species in one forest patch. A lot of this diversity is fast disappearing. Between 1700 and 1995, the period of industrialization, 13.9 million square kilometers of forest or 9.3% of the world is total area was cleared for industrial uses, cultivation, pastures, and fuel wood. Good. From the above lines, we can decipher that what will come ahead of us in the following chapter, as the narrator has asked us to look around and observe the things that we obtain from the forests. Next, the narrator has provided us with some important uses of forests. The period of industrialization began from 1700 till 1995, which led to clearing of forest cover to utilize them for cultivation, pastures, fuel wood, and other industrial uses. Why deforestation? The disappearance of forests is referred to as deforestation. Deforestation is not a recent problem. The process began many centuries ago, but under colonial rule, it became more systematic and extensive. Let us look at some of the causes of deforestation in India. Land to be improved. In 1600, approximately 1/6 of India's landmass was under cultivation. Now that figure has gone up to half. As population increased over the centuries and the demand for food went up, the peasants extended the boundaries of cultivation, clearing forests and breaking new land. In the colonial period, the cultivation expanded rapidly for a variety of reasons. First, the British directly encouraged the production of commercial crops like jute, sugar, wheat, and cotton. The demand for these crops increased in 19th century Europe when food grains were needed to feed the growing urban population and raw materials were required for industrial production. Second, in the early 19th century, the colonial state thought that forests were unproductive. They were considered to be wilderness that had to be brought under cultivation so that the land could yield agricultural products and revenue and enhance the income of the state. So, between 1880 and 1920, cultivated areas rose by 6.7 million hectares. We always see the expansion of cultivation as a sign of progress, but we should not forget that for land to be brought under the plough, forests have to be cleared. Well, deforestation means disappearance of forests, and it is not a recent problem. It began many centuries ago, but under colonial rule, it became more systematic and extensive. In 1600, 1/6 of the Indian landmass was used for cultivation. Over the centuries, as the population grew and the demand for food went up, peasants started clearing forests and breaking new land. British encouraged the production of commercial crops like jute, sugar, wheat, and cotton. In the 19th century, the demand for these crops increased. The colonial state thought that forests were unproductive in the early 19th century. So between 1880 and 1920, cultivated areas and the expansion of cultivation showed a sign of progress. Sleepers on the tracks. By the early 19th century, oak forests in England were disappearing. This created a problem of timber supply for the Royal Navy. How could English ships be built without a regular supply of strong and durable timber? How could imperial power be protected and maintained without ships? By 1820s, search parties were sent to explore the forest resources of India. Within a decade, trees were being fallen on a massive scale and vast quantities of timber were being exported from India. The spread of railways from the 1850s created a new demand. Railways were essential for colonial trade and for the movement of the imperial troops. To run locomotives, wood was needed as fuel, and to lay railway lines, sleepers were essential to hold the tracks together. Each mile of railway track required between 1760 and 2000 sleepers. From the 1860s, the railway network expanded rapidly. By 1890, about 25,500 kilometers of track had been laid. In 1946, the length of the tracks had increased to over 7,65,000 kilometers. As the railway tracks spread through India, a larger and larger number of trees were fallen. As early as the 1850s, in the Madras Presidency alone, 35,000 trees were being cut annually for sleepers. The government gave out contracts to individuals to supply the required quantities. These contractors began cutting trees indiscriminately. Forests around the railway tracks fast started disappearing. Plantations. Large areas of natural forests were also cleared up to make way for tea, coffee, and rubber plantations to meet Europe's growing need for these commodities. The colonial government took over the forests and gave vast areas to European planters at cheap rates. These areas were enclosed and cleared of forests and planted with tea or coffee. The rise of commercial forestry. In the previous section, we have seen that the British needed forests in order to build ships and railways. The British were worried that the use of forests by the local people and the reckless felling of trees by traders would destroy forests. So they decided to invite a German expert, Dietrich Brandis, for advice and made him the first Inspector General of Forests in India. Brandis realized that a proper system had to be introduced to manage the forests and people had to be trained in the science of conservation. This system would need legal sanction. Rules about the use of forest resources had to be framed. Felling of trees and grazing had to be restricted so that forests could be preserved for timber production. Anybody who cut trees without following the system had to be punished. So Brandeis set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and helped formulate the Indian Forest Act of 1865. The Imperial Forest Research Institute was set up at Dehradun in 1906. The system they taught here was called scientific forestry. Many people now, including ecologists, feel that this system is not scientific at all. In scientific forestry, natural forests, which had a lot of different types of trees, were cut down. In their place, one type of tree was planted in straight rows. This is called a plantation. Forest officials surveyed the forests, estimated the area under different types of trees, and made working plans for forest management. They planned how much of the plantation area was to be cut every year. The area cut was then to be replanted, so it was ready to be cut again in some years. After the Forest Act was enacted in 1865, it was amended twice, once in 1878 and then in 1927. The 1878 Act divided forests into three categories: reserved, protected, and village forests. The best forests were called as reserved forests. Villagers could not take anything from these forests, even for their own use. For house building or fuel, they could take wood from protected or village forests. How were the lives of people affected? Foresters and villagers had very different ideas of what a good forest should look like. Villagers wanted forests with a mixture of species to satisfy different needs like fuel, fodder, and leaves. The forest department, on the other hand, wanted trees which were suitable for building ships or railways. They needed trees that could provide hardwood and were tall and straight. So particular species like teak and sal were promoted and the others were cut. In forest areas, people use forest products like roots, leaves, fruits, and tubers for many things. Fruits and tubers are nutritious to eat, especially during the monsoons before the harvest has come in. Herbs are used for medicine, wood for agricultural implements like yokes and plows. Bamboo makes excellent fences and is also used to make baskets and umbrellas. A dried, scooped out gourd can be used as a portable water bottle. Almost everything is available in the forest. Leaves can be stitched together to make disposable plates and cups. The siadi, which is also called as the Bauhinia valley creeper, can be used to make ropes, and the thorny bark of the semur, which is silk cotton tree, is used to grate vegetables. Oil for cooking and to light lamps can be pressed from the fruit of the mahua tree. The Forest Act meant severe hardship for the villagers across the country. After the act, all their everyday practices like cutting wood for their houses, grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing became illegal. People were now forced to steal wood from the forests, and if they were caught, they were at the mercy of the forest guards who would take bribes from them. Women who collected fuel wood were especially worried. It was also common for the police constables and forest guards to harass people by demanding free food from them. How did forest rules affect cultivation? One of the major impacts of the European colonization was on the practice of shifting cultivation or swidden agriculture. This is a traditional agricultural practice in many parts of Asia, Africa, and South America. It has many local names such as lading in Southeast Asia, milpa in Central America, chitemene or tavi in Africa, and chenna in Sri Lanka. In India, dhya, penda, bevar, nevad, jhoom, podu, khandad, and kumri are some of the local terms for swid in agriculture. In shifting cultivation, parts of the forests are cut and burnt in rotation. Seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crop is harvested by October and November. Such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow for 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. A mixture of crops is grown on these plots. In central India and Africa, it could be millets. In Brazil, manioc. And in other parts of Latin America, maize and beans. European foresters regarded this practice as harmful for the forests. They felt that land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow trees for railway timber. When a forest was burnt, there was the added danger of the flames spreading and burning valuable timber. Shifting cultivation also made it harder for the government to calculate taxes. Therefore, the government decided to ban shifting cultivation. As a result, many communities were forcibly displaced from their houses in the forests. Some had to change occupations, while some resisted through large and small rebellions. Who could hunt? The new forest laws changed the lives of forest dwellers in yet another way. Before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near forests had survived by hunting deer, partridges, and a variety of small animals. This customary practice was prohibited by the forest laws. Those who were caught hunting were now punished for poaching. While the forest laws deprived people for their customary acts to hunt, hunting of big game became a sport. In India, hunting of tigers and other animals had been part of the culture of the court and nobility for centuries. Many Mughal paintings show princes and emperors enjoying a hunt. But under colonial rule, the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that various species became almost extinct. The British saw large animals such as signs of a wild, primitive, savage society. They believed that by killing dangerous animals, the British would civilize India. They gave rewards for killing of tigers, wolves, and other large animals on the grounds that they posed a threat to cultivators. Over 80,000 tigers, 150,000 leopards, and 2 lakh wolves were killed for reward in the period 1875 to 1925. Gradually, the tiger came to be seen as a sporting trophy. The Maharaja of Sarguja alone shot 1,157 tigers and 2,000 leopards up to 1957. A British administrator, George Yule, killed 400 tigers. Initially, certain areas of forests were reserved for hunting. Only much later did environmentalists and conservators begin to argue that all these species of animals are needed to be protected and not killed. New trades, new employments, and new services. While people lost out in many ways after the Forest Department took control of the forests, some people benefited from the new opportunities that had opened up in trade. Many communities left their traditional occupations and started trading in forest products. This happened not only in India but also across the world. For example, with the growing demand for rubber in the mid-19th century, the Munduruku people of the Brazilian Amazon, who lived in villages on high ground and cultivated manioc, began to collect latex from wild rubber trees for supplying to traders. Gradually, they descended to live in trading posts and became completely dependent on traders. In India, the trade in forest products was not new. From the medieval period onwards, we have records of Adivasi communities trading elephants and other goods like hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, fibers, grasses, gums, and raisins through nomadic communities like Banjaras. With the coming of the British, however, the trade was completely regulated by the government. The British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest products of particular areas. Grazing and hunting by local people were restricted. In the process, many pastoralist and nomadic communities like the Korava, Karacha, and Yerukula of the Madras Presidency lost their livelihoods. Some of them began to be called criminal tribes, and they were forced to work instead in factories, mines, and plantations under government supervision. New opportunities of work did not always mean improved well being for the people. In Assam, both men and women from forest communities like Santals and Oraons from Jharkhand and Goans from Chhattisgarh were recruited to work on tea plantations. Their wages were low and conditions of work were very bad. They could not return easily to their home villages from where they had been recruited. Rebellion in the forest. In many parts of India and across the world, forest communities rebelled against the changes that were being imposed on them. The leaders of these movements against the British, like Sidhu and Kanu in the Santhal Parganas, Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, or Alluri Sitarama Raju of Andhra Pradesh are still remembered today in songs and stories. We will now discuss in detail one such rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Bastar in 1910. The people of Bastar. Bastar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh and borders Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Maharashtra. The central part of Bastar is on a plateau. To the north of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain, and to its south is the Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across Bastar east to west. A number of different communities live in Bastar, such as Maria and Muria Gonds, Durvas, Bhatras, and Halbas. They speak different languages but share common customs and beliefs. The people of Bastar believe that each village was given its land by the earth, and in return, they look after the earth by making some offerings at each agricultural festival. In addition to the earth, they show respect to the spirits of the river, the forest, and the mountain. Since each village knows where its boundary lies, the local people look after all the natural resources within that boundary. If people from a village want to take some wood from the forest to another village, they pay a small fee called Devsari, Dand, or Man in exchange. Some villages also protect their forest by engaging watchmen, and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headmen of villages in a pargana, which is cluster of villages, meet and discuss issues of concern including forests. The fears of people. When the colonial government proposed to reserve 2/3 of the forest in 1905 and stop shifting cultivation, hunting, and collection of forest produce, the people of Bastar were very worried. Some villagers were allowed to stay on in the reserved forest on the condition that they worked free for the forest department in cutting and transporting trees and protecting the forest from fires. Subsequently, these came to be known as forest villagers. People of other villages were displaced without any notice or compensation. For long, villagers had been suffering from increased land rents and frequent demands for free labor and goods by colonial officials. Then came the terrible famines in 1899 to 1900s and again in 1907 and 1908. Reservations proved to be the last straw. People began to gather and discuss these issues in their village councils, in bazaars, and at festivals or wherever the headmen and priests of several villages were assembled. The initiative was taken by the Dhurvas, of the Kangir forest, where reservation first took place. Although there was no single leader, many people spoke of Gunda Dhur from village Nethanar as an important figure in the movement. In 1910, mango bows, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows began circulating between villages. These were actual messages inviting villagers to rebel against the British. Every village contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Bazaars were looted, the houses of officials and traders, schools and police stations were burnt and robbed, and the grain redistributed. Most of those who were attacked were in some way associated with the colonial state and its oppressive laws. William Ward, a missionary who observed the events, wrote, "From all directions came streaming into Jagdalpur police, merchants, forest peons, schoolmasters, and immigrants. The British sent troops to suppress the rebellion. The Adivasi leaders tried to negotiate, but the British surrounded their camps and fired upon them. After that, they had marched through the villages, flogging and punishing those who had taken part in the rebellion. Most villages were deserted as people fled into jungles. It took 3 months, February to May, for the British to regain control. However, they never managed to capture Gunda Dhur. In a major victory for the rebels, work on reservation was temporarily suspended, and the area was to be reserved was reduced to roughly half of that planned before 1910. The story of the forests and people of Bastar does not end here. After independence, the same practice of keeping people out of the forests and reserving them for industrial areas continued. In 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. It was only after protests by the local environmentalists that the project was stopped. Forest transformations in Java. Java is now famous as a rice-producing island in Indonesia, but once upon a time, it was covered mostly with forests. The colonial power in Indonesia were the Dutch, and as we will see, there were many similarities in the laws for forest control in Indonesia and India. Java in Indonesia is where the Dutch started forest management. Like the British, they wanted timber from Java to build ships. In 1600, the population of Java was an estimated 3.4 million. There were many villages in the fertile plains, but there were also many communities living in the mountains and practicing shifting agriculture. The woodcutters of Java. The Kalangs of Java were a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable that in 1755, when the Mataram kingdom of Java split, the 6,000 Kalang families were equally divided between two kingdoms. Without their expertise, it would have been difficult to harvest teak and for the kings to build their palaces. When the Dutch began to gain control over the forests in the 18th century, they tried to make the Kalangs work under them. In 1770, the Kalangs resisted by attacking a Dutch fort at Joanna, but the uprising was suppressed. Dutch scientific forestry. In the 19th century, when it became important to control territory and not just people, the Dutch enacted forest laws in Java restricting villagers' access to forests. Now wood could only be cut for specified purposes like making riverboats or constructing houses, and only from specific forests under close supervision. Villagers were punished for grazing cattle in young stands, transporting wood without a permit, or traveling on forest roads with horse carts or cattle. As in India, the need to manage forests for shipbuilding and railways led to the introduction of a forest service. In 1882, 280,000 sleepers were Source G exported from Java alone. However, from all this required labor to cut the trees, transport the logs, and prepare the sleepers. The Dutch first imposed rents on land being cultivated in the forest and then exempted some villages from these rents if they worked collectively to provide free labor and buffaloes for cutting and transporting timber. This was known as Blandong system. Later, instead of rent exemption, forest villagers were given small wages, but their right to cultivate forest land was restricted. Salmons challenge. Around 1890, Surontico Salmon of Randublatang village, a teak forest village, began questioning state ownership of the forest. He argued that the state had not created the wind, water, earth, and wood, so it could not own it. Soon, a widespread movement developed. Amongst those who helped organize it were Samini's son-in-laws. By 1907, 3,000 families were following his ideas. Some of the Saminists protested by lying down on their land when the Dutch came to survey it, while refused to pay taxes or fines or perform labor, war, and deforestation. The First World War and the Second World War had a major impact on forests. In India, working plants were abandoned at this time, and the Forest Department cut trees freely to meet British war needs. In Java, just before the Japanese occupied the region, the Dutch followed a scorched earth policy, destroying sawmills and burning huge piles of giant teak logs so that they could not fall into Japanese hands. The Japanese then exploited the forests recklessly for their own war industries, forcing forest villagers to cut down forests. Many villagers used this opportunity to expand cultivation in the forest. After the war, it was difficult for the Indonesian Forest Service to get this land back. As in India, people in need for agricultural land has brought them into conflict with the Forest Department in desire to control the land and exclude people from it. Children, now that the chapter is finished, let's look at some fun exercises now. You have 5 minutes to try these short questions out. First one. Which new trade was created due to the introduction of new forest laws? Second, name the communities living in Bastar. Third, who are the Kalangs of Java? Fourth, why did the government decide to ban shifting cultivation? Fifth, which type of trees were preferred by the Forest Department? Excellent answers, students. Now, let's match your answers with the answer sheet. First, collecting latex from wild rubber trees. Second, Maria and Muria gourds, Dhurvas, Bhatras, and Halbas. Third, skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. Fourth, because when a forest was burnt, there was the danger of destroying valuable timber. Fifth, the trees are suitable for building ships and railways. Students, now try to answer these long questions on your own. First, what is the new development in forestry? Second, why did the people of Bastar rise in revolt against the British? Third, why did the Dutch adopt the scorched earth policy during the war? So that's it for today, class. Thank you and hope you all had fun learning.